Who said the West Coast owned bragging rights as the wine capital of the United States? There's a winery right here in South Central Indiana, giving the big dogs a run for their money.
If you go down the list, I believe we're the largest not on the West Coast. So most of our competitors are on the West Coast, and then you get to this little place in Indiana called Bloomington with a nice winery.
Oliver Winery in Bloomington. It's been an Indiana staple for more than a half century and has grown into one of the top 35 wineries in the country. The secret sauce behind Oliver's success with CEO Pat Brown on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. And I'm pleased to be joined on the podcast this week by Pat Brown. Pat is the CEO at Oliver Winery, really an institution in Monroe County, in Indiana, really. And Pat, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate any airtime we can get with our local Indiana people.
Yeah, well, everyone knows the Oliver name, 50 plus years, 52 years, I think, since the founding a few decades ago. But you're just the third CEO in the history of the company. So it's been a pretty stable environment there. What we'll talk about your background, but what attracted you to this job?
A couple different things. I didn't know much about Oliver Winery before it was put on my desk. And the more I saw, the more I was impressed by the business. And then, beyond the business, once you start interacting with the group, you're really impressed with the people. And to me, it's really important who you work with and who you work for. So people's really number one, and they're great people. To your point, I'm the third CEO in 52 years. Comes with a little bit of weight to make sure we keep this thing going and keep the team kind of moving forward. But the people super impressive, the business super impressive, and to me, it just had such great potential moving forward and was a fit with where I thought I could make an impact. So I always look for that in companies that. Can I come here? Can I make an impact? Can I add value to the company? And at the end of the day, do you like people you're working with? And I do.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah. Your background, 30 plus years with some big consumer brands, Unilever, Johnson & Johnson, Kind Snacks, another one. So a lot of consumer brands. Talk about your background and how you feel that translates now into the wine business.
Yeah, I've seen a lot. And so I have the experience of a lot of mistakes I've seen over the years, and kind of, it's probably more what not to do than what to do over time. At times that's important, but I've got, 30 years. I've been in the US. I've been in Canada. I worked in Australia for 3 years. I worked on probably 40, 50 different categories. And it seems like the only part of the store I haven't touched is alcohol. So the joke is the last one to tick off. In my career, I just had to go do it. So I've got a pretty broad spectrum of brands and categories and retailers and geographies to kind of draw from, which is really cool. But this is a new space. I like learning new things and getting into new competitive categories. And I bring my background and experience, and they teach me about the category and how to compete here. So it's a nice synergy between myself and the teams.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that. What's the learning curve been like? Any surprises as you kind of get into the alcohol, the wine business, and kind of learning what it's all about?
I think the biggest difference is the regulatory environment. Right. And so that's number one, regulatory environment. Never been in a regulated category, number one, and you got 50 different states with 50 different rules, and you got to know all of them. And there's intricacies involved. And then number two, the 3-tier system. I'm usually a direct relationship with a retailer. I can sit down in front of Walmart and pitch my stuff. And a lot of time in the 3-tier system, that's not the case. So those are the two big differences. Other than that, it's a product on a shelf at a price. And you're competing in a retail environment. So those things are all fairly familiar, as far as a background.
Yeah, talk about that 3-tier system for folks who may not be familiar with the alcohol business and how it's different.
Yeah, we can't sell directly to a retailer. So our products, we cannot ship directly to, say, a Meijer, a Walmart, a Kroger, right? It's got to go through a third-party distributor, and then the distributor sells and distributes to the retail environment. So they'll ship it to the retail store, they'll put it on a shelf, et cetera. And sometimes they interact with the buying teams as well. So my environment background has always been a direct relationships. We ship directly to the retailers. It's just a different environment, rules, regulations. It's,
Yeah.
been around since prohibition. So I don't think I'm going to change that. So I gotta learn to live with it, I guess.
Yeah, talk about, and again, as you said, this is your first time in a regulated business, but as you look at Indiana, and as you mentioned, 50 states, 50, all kinds of different rules and regulations around the country. Any sense for the regulatory climate here in Indiana and how it stacks up? Certainly, a lot has changed over the last 20 or 30 years when it comes
Yeah.
to, breweries and wineries and distilleries and all those kinds of things. Any feel for the regulatory environment here?
It's just, I think somebody was telling me that Indiana you could buy liquor on Sundays now,
Yeah, right,
after
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
that changed not long ago. I lived in Arkansas for a while working with Walmart in Bentonville, and that was a dry county. And so I've been in all different types of geographies with all different types of rules, regulations, probably middle of the pack. What I like about Indiana most is it's a business friendly environment from that standpoint. So it's a great place to do business, great place to set up shop, run a plant, run a winery, and certainly very, very reasonable people you deal with. So certainly not on the fringe of really, really hard to work with from an environment standpoint. Every state has their nuances, but I feel Indiana's very reasonable.
Yeah, Oliver, so many people in Indiana know the brand, but maybe not a lot of people know how substantial this winery, substantial a business it's really grown into. Founded in 1972, IU law professor Bill Oliver, experimenting with homemade winemaking. It really
Yeah.
is a great entrepreneurial success story. Now, I believe Oliver is among the 30 largest wineries in the country. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think we're about 32, 33, number 33 in the country from a volume standpoint, which is pretty significant.
Yeah.
And from, if you go down the list, I believe we're the largest not on the West Coast.
Wow.
So most of our competitors are on the West Coast, and then you get to this little place in Indiana called Bloomington with a nice winery. But gives us a little bit of a competitive advantage, I think, being out there. Lets us think differently. We're not held to the same traditions and kind of thoughts on what a wine should and shouldn't be or how you operate. So let's just think a little differently. Number one, number two, it's close to a lot of people, right? So we're one day to the northeast, one day to the southeast. We're all over the Midwest. We can get down to Texas, maybe a day and a half to California, but we're in a great geography from a distribution standpoint. And then number three, Indiana's a great place to do business. That's why you keep hearing about plants and people moving their facilities and their offices to Indiana because it's a great place to do business.
Yeah, you talk about the West Coast wineries, California and Washington and Oregon. From a competitive standpoint, do you compete necessarily with those West Coast wines, or what's the competitive landscape look like for Oliver?
Yes, you compete with them because you're competing for shelf space, right? At retailers, across the country. So yes, we are competing with them from a shelf space, from a business standpoint. A lot of them from a consumer standpoint, probably not. What we never wanted to do was be the 30th Cab Sav on the shelf and compete that way. So we make different things. Like most of our products are very, very innovative, and they're different than what say a Napa winery would produce, right? Our latest two innovations, we have a Cosmo Berry and a Dream Berry, which is a layered flavored red that tastes like a Cosmo. And that's just something Napa probably is not going to produce and ship anytime soon. And
Yeah.
so when we get to the shelf and the buyer looks at the product, there's no other product on there on the shelf that there is no other Cosmo Berry. So it's a unique product, a unique flavor, a unique offering for the consumer that's different. And so we're competing in the same environment, but we try to have differentiated products and a point of difference to compete with the bigger players.
So is that key from a competitive standpoint to find those niche areas and those niche products? Is that key for Oliver?
I think number one, it was key to expand beyond Indiana and the heartland, right? So I think that was number one. Number two, the consumer's changing. And, these younger consumers may not care what year it was bottled. They may not care what appellation it was. They may not care about a lot of things. What they care about is it tastes good. It's accessible from their price point. They can afford it, and their friends love it, and they can bring it to any occasion and drink it. So from that standpoint, I think we have a competitive advantage because we have a great tasting product. And that was the other really attractive thing, because to me, product is king and the consumer's in charge, right? So you really gotta meet the consumer where they're at, and they're changing. So I think we're set up for the new wine consumer, and we're set up to bring new consumers into the wine category, which is super important to retailers, that we keep the category healthy. We keep people coming into the category, and then they can move them up over time as they get more sophisticated.
And really sweet wines, right? Are the, pardon the pun, the sweet spot for Oliver. I know looking at Oliver Sweet Red, the blueberry Moscato, I think at least at one time were the first and second best selling wines in the state of Indiana.
Yeah, absolutely. For the last 20 years, we've had the number one wine in Sweet Red. The joke is around the winery, it's like milk. It's that important to retailers here like Meyer and Kroger. But yeah, we're a while ago they decided, okay, we're going to go down this sweet category where other players aren't playing as much, and they thought, gosh, people like good tasting wine. And the interesting thing, when I came in and I had this perception of a sweet wine, when I tasted it, it's not that sweet. It's just, I'd call it flavored, I'd call it lightly sweet. It's refreshing. It's something, God forbid you put over ice and you have on a hot summer day.
Yeah.
You can't do that in wine, but our products, you can put over ice and put in a tumbler and, take it to the picnic and have a good time, have something you like. So I view us as much our competitive environment, I would say, is in beverages. The way consumers are anymore, they're not wine drinkers per se exclusively, or beer drinkers, or, the RTDs is a big category now. Spirits, Aperol spritzes are the, drink of the day these days. The RTD canned cocktails like White Claw and Truly and, et cetera. So I think we're competing with those options with consumers.
Yep.
And I think we're set up really well for that, because I would put our taste profile up against any beverage in the marketplace right now. I really would.
Yeah. Oh, how do you stay ahead, or at least stay on top of consumer tastes, consumer interests? That has to be, a challenge. How do you do that? What's the process?
You look at data in the marketplace, and you look at demographics, and you look where you want to go. And certainly, the heartland's a little bit different. We're expanding into places like Texas and retailers like HEB. And, it's a little different demographic down there in Texas. And you got to understand your consumers, and you got to understand what they're drinking. And so, I like to spend a lot of time in stores, in markets, talking to retailers, talking to consumers, and looking at and what's selling and what's not selling. And that kind of tells you. The consumer will tell you what they want.
Yeah.
You just have to listen, right? So that's number one. Number two, we are super innovative. Like, we have everything in-house. We don't outsource anything. So we have our own R&D, we have our own lab, we have our own QA, we have a big bottling line, we have a small bottling line, we have 4 production facilities. I can make 5 million cases. I can make a 30,000 case run, or I can make a 20 case run. And a lot of people don't have that kind of flexibility. And, if a retailer like Walmart comes to us and say, hey, we're interested in X, in 6 weeks, I can have him the branding, the bottling, the packaging, as well as the product on his desk. And not a lot of big players can do that. So we innovate pretty quickly. We're a small organization, but we have a lot of capabilities, which is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. What can you identify maybe the biggest challenge in being a Midwest winery, here in Indiana? I always think of the grape growing, the climate here. People would say, is it really conducive to wines? What's the big challenge?
The challenge is not the winemaking. Just like all wineries, most wineries get their grapes locally, and they import grapes in when they need it. So we do in our wines. We where we have to, we'll go get the best sourcing of fruit and products from wherever that is. It could be West Coast, it could be the Midwest, it could be up along the Great Lakes, to put in our wine. So sourcing is super, super important, and I think we source as well as anybody. I think the challenge is getting the retailers and getting our own company out of the mindset that we're a regional brand. We're not. Our products are in 43 different states, and their profiles are, I think, accessible to all consumers in all states. So it's about getting the right proposition, working with retailers, supporting the brand, getting people on the street. So that's it. It's probably more resources to expand globally
Hmm.
beyond the Midwest and our backyard. But certainly, I think we have everything we have to be a national brand, not a Midwest brand. I mean, you don't think of Napa brands as just a California brand. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
And Josh just isn't a New York brand, right? They don't think
Yep.
of it. So why should an Indiana brand be thought of as just an Indiana brand?
Yeah.
We're a national brand. That's how we're going to act, and that's how we're going to move forward.
Yeah. Well, how big is technology in your business, in the wine business? You mentioned a customer like Walmart comes with a specific need and the ability to match that. How important is technology? Does AI play into your operations there? It seems it's impacting everything from manufacturing to every other sector.
It is. It is. It is. So technology. So I think data is super important because you really have to understand the market and consumer and the nuances of a retailer like a Walmart. Like a Walmart in Indiana does not act like a Walmart in Florida, and you've got to understand those differences when you go to market. So data is super important. The other one is just consumer insights. And sometimes that's not technology. Sometimes you got to go talk to consumers and get the insights behind the numbers and the reasons behind the actions, if you will. And then and you also find out what's missing, right? So the data can't tell you what's missing and what's not out there, but consumers can, what they're looking for, which is super important. And then AI, we've been using AI, kind of more and more. But I think it's a big opportunity for everybody to engage. I use it from a daily basis just to check my thinking on things and
Yeah.
check our thought processes. And it's interesting what you get back from it. But more to do on that. I think we're in just early stages of AI in our business.
Any feel at this point for how the prospect of tariffs, on a more, global political scale might affect the business? The president has talked about potentially tariffs on champagnes and wines coming in from Europe. Any potential impact at Oliver?
No, not at all. We're set up really well. We've always been, locally and nationally sourced. We get all our cherries from Michigan and our honey from Michigan. We get, our grapes here locally and up along Niagara and then the West Coast. So we're set up. We did really well. That was one of our benefits during COVID, is that we had product other people didn't, because you had ports shut down, people you're
Right.
shipping in from overseas. We had great 50-year relationships with suppliers that really helped us out. So we did really well during COVID, and I think we'll do really well moving forward. So really almost zero impact from a tariff standpoint moving forward. So we're American made.
Much more ahead with Pat Brown, the CEO at Oliver Winery, when we come back on the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC.
At PNC Bank, we're committed to making a difference in the lives of our customers and communities by helping them move forward financially. As a Main Street bank, we try to do right by our customers with every encounter. Our local teams offer personalized financial advice to help guide you in making the best decision. We're proud to be part of your community. PNC Bank. See how we can make a difference for you at pnc.com. Copyright 2022, the PNC Financial Services Group, Inc., all rights reserved.
We build Indiana. The Laborers International Union of North America builds and maintains roads, bridges, and other essential infrastructure that make us the crossroads of America. So thanks to LIUNA members' work, Hoosiers have a better quality of life, like access to utilities, easier routes to jobs, schools, or medical care, and deliveries keep moving. We build Indiana for good jobs and stronger communities. The Laborers International Union of North America. We are LIUNA.
And welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week is the new, or relatively new, coming up on a year as CEO at Oliver Winery, Pat Brown. And Pat, let's talk a little bit about your background. Where was home? Where'd you grow up?
Grew up just outside of Chicago, South Side, so Orland Park area.
Okay. Talk about growing up in the Chicago area, what it was like. What were you into? Was it sports or arts or school or what was a young Pat Brown like?
It was mainly sports. So football, basketball, volleyball, you name it, year round you're doing something, right? Mom wants to keep you busy. You're an energetic little kid. You got to keep them busy. And sports were great around Chicago, the
Yeah.
schools and system and the league. I played Pop Warner football in Chicago. And then the other one is just outdoor sports. We spent a lot of time up in Iowa along the Mississippi River, fishing, hunting, doing all those kinds of things with my father. So typical Midwestern, upbringing, as a kid. So it's very familiar. When I came back to India, I remember the first time I flew in, I'm like, oh, this is just like Iowa in Illinois. So
Yeah.
very, very familiar, as I come into the
Yeah.
Oliver business. So.
Now you spent some time was high school years in Florida?
Yeah, it was actually South Miami. So South Dade High School in Miami. So quite a difference from Chicago, the suburbs of
Yeah.
Chicago. I always frame it up as, I grew up in something like Wonder Years, and then my high school years were more like Scarface. and it's not too far from the truth. So it was an interesting upbringing, and it teaches you to be flexible in your thinking and keeps you on your toes.
Now you were a Richmond Spider in college, right?
Correct.
Why did you pick Richmond?
It was a combination of the best school and the best athletics, that I was looking at.
Did you play sports in college?
Yeah, I played football at the University of Risk. So I played football in high school in Miami, Florida in the 80s. As anybody would know, watches any 30 for 30 on ESPN. A very competitive time
Yes.
in high school sports and football. So I think my senior year, I was being recruited by University of Miami, but they won the national championship that year.
Wow.
And then, so I went to every home game, but I didn't go beyond that. And then I think all three schools, Florida State, and Miami, which were the only three schools in the state with really any kind of football program, I think all of them were in the top 5.
Wow. Yeah.
That year. So it was out of state, and Richmond was a number 1 great school, and number 2, which was important, especially, my father was go to the best school you can.
Yeah.
And they were paying for it. So that's a good deal.
Wow. That's great.
And then a good football program with good coaches and, solid people again. Really,
yeah.
really
I was going to say Richmond's got a great football program.
Yeah. Great football. We've had a great basketball program over time. When I was there, I think we had 2 Sweet 16s and had some roommates who played basketball.
Well, I have to ask you about that because there's a connection, right, to IU basketball and Richmond.
Right.
Tell us about that experience.
Yeah. So I think it was my senior year. We got in the tournament. And I think it was the first round. We played Indiana. It was a year after they won the national championship with Keith Smart.
Yep.
And my roommate was a point guard. And so certainly, we would go to, as many games as we could, certainly watching. So that was a big time. We beat Indiana after they won the national championship. We were not supposed to win that game, but that was, those are fun times in those tournaments. And, it's a small school. It's only, 3,000-4,000 kids. So, everybody, and, all the athletes know each other. So, all the basketball players, they know you. So it was kind of a fun time to watch them in the tournament. And that's a connection. That's a connection. We left them out.
Well, I was going to say that's a painful memory for a lot of IU fans. I do remember that, and remember that tournament game very, very well. Pat, as you look going forward at Oliver and your thought process, well, first of all, I want to get back to some of the personal stuff. Living in the Bloomington area, I assume that was probably on the plus side of the ledger when you looked at the various things in terms of taking this job, quality of life, so important in these types of things. What were your thoughts on moving to the Bloomington area?
Yeah, absolutely. Number 1, I love a college town. There's so much, I've been to a couple football games this past year, went to a basketball game this year. Certainly have enjoyed, the square downtown. Love the farmers market on a weekend. I think it's the best farmers market I've ever been to. I've been to a lot. And, the things like the music program, and there's so many things on campus, the museums. There's so many things about a college town and a college that I think is attractive. So, and it's one of those things that it has everything you need, but it's not too big. and not too crowded. And, the people are just nice as anything. And again, it goes back to the people, super people around Bloomington. And then what I really appreciate is when I travel coming in and out of Indianapolis Airport, it's so quick.
Yeah.
Like
Isn't that true? Yeah.
I hit the ground in an hour. I can be in Bloomington at my, at the place. So it's really easy from that standpoint to hit the airport, get down to Bloomington. Very, very accessible.
Yeah, interesting. I had Bloomington's mayor on the podcast a few weeks back, and she made the point, and maybe this is going to be a marketing thing down in Bloomington. She said, now it is as quick, maybe quicker to get from Bloomington to the Indianapolis International as it is from Fishers to Indianapolis International. So that's a real selling point. Yeah,
absolutely. It's 45 minutes, and I've done it, probably 30 times so far.
Yeah.
So I know that road well. So it's really easy from that standpoint. To from my standpoint, I tell people I'd much rather be in Bloomington than LA, New York, Chicago, and coming in and out of those places. Cause I've done a lot of East Coast travel, Unilever, J&J, Pfizer, they're all out of New York, New Jersey. Kind was out of New York. And while I love New York, it's a great place. It's really hard to get in and out of.
Yeah.
It takes a lot out of you. So I appreciate the ease of getting in and out of Indianapolis and accessibility to Bloomington.
Pat, final question for you, and kind of your vision for Oliver Winery as you look, maybe 3, 4, 5 years and beyond. What would you like to see Oliver Winery become?
A national player in wine. And right now we're in about 25% ACV, which, roughly we're in about 25% of the stores in the country. And just, getting to 40, 50, and adding some innovation to that, the math says it's a clear doubling our business, which is, great for us, but great for the local area. Cause that means, more employees and kind of a bigger base, maybe a bigger production facility. So that's where I see us in a couple of years, is having more of a national competitive footprint with the national players, right? The Walmarts, the Krogers of the world, et cetera. Because that's 60, 70% of our business is in chains, right? Mm-hmm. Kroger, Meijer's just probably one of our best partners. Kroger's a good partner. Walmart's growing for us. So certainly a big footprint nationally, so a consumer can go anywhere in the country and walk in a store and have our products, available to them.
Well, Pat Brown, has been a real treat to get to talk to you, know you a little bit, learn about your football background too. I didn't ask you what position you played.
I was a linebacker.
Okay.
So outside linebacker. So yeah, it was a fun time. Not a lifetime sport apparently, but it was fun while it lasted. Had a lot of good memories, a lot of good friends, that go back on the team. That's the best thing about team sports.
Yeah.
Is all the people, and that's kind of why I like this industry, because it's truly a team sport. We've got 60, 70 people down there in Bloomington, and it's like a team, right? Everybody's, people in the tasting room, or people in landscaping, or people in a production facility, or, the finance team, there's the winemaking team. It is a team sport. It's fun to be a part of.
Well, I have no doubt you'll take Oliver Winery to new heights in a very competitive business. Pat, thank you again for joining us. I look forward to seeing you soon. Absolutely. Thanks for having us. All right. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Business and Beyond podcast, where weekly episodes that dive into achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can listen to all of our episodes, all 200 plus episodes, and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.